the street. They call me a hero, but if you looked inside my chest, you'd see it isn't made of metals. It's full of ghosts. Every Veterans Day, people line the streets with flags and coffee cups shouting, "Thank you for your service." And I smile because that's what you do when people mean well. But the truth? Hello, my dear listeners. I'm Auntie Grace. Welcome to True Heart Voices, where every story finds its healing. Thank you for being here. If you love true stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps keep these voices alive. I always find it fascinating to read which cities and countries you're listening from, so don't hesitate to write a comment. Now, sit back for a moment and please get comfortable. Happy listening. Let's talk about what really happened. That smile is the most dishonest thing about me. I've worn it for 12 years, since the day I came home, since the day I buried the truth under a uniform I no longer fit into. That morning, the one that started everything, the air in our little town was cold enough to bite. November sunlight spilled through my kitchen window, catching the dust that floated above the counter like slow-moving snow. I stood there, pressing my hand around a chipped coffee mug, listening to the sound of the Veterans Day parade warming up downtown. The brass section tuning, kids laughing, marching boots on asphalt. It should have been a comforting sound, but it wasn't. Because for me, parades always end with silence. My daughter Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing something on a piece of printer paper. She's 15 now, too young to understand war, too old to believe her mother is invincible. "Are you going today?" she asked, without looking up. I hesitated, maybe for a little while. They asked me to speak again. Emma stopped drawing. "You always cry when you talk." I smiled at that, the kind of small, broken smile a parent gives when a child tells the truth. "I know," I said quietly. "Maybe that's the only honest part of it. When I first came back from Afghanistan, people wanted to hear everything. They wanted the stories, the courage, the patriotism, but they didn't want all of it. They didn't want to hear about the nights you can't sleep because you still see the same street corner, or the mornings when the smell of diesel makes you freeze halfway through a grocery store aisle. They wanted the version of me that fit neatly between their applause and their anthem. So that's the version I gave them, until now. Because today, this Veterans Day, something inside me is done pretending. And the truth I've carried all these years, it's heavy enough to finally break through. I didn't plan to confess it. Not here. Not in front of cameras, school children, and mayors. But sometimes, life pushes you to a moment where the weight of silence is worse than the pain of speaking. By noon, the town square was full. Old men in faded uniforms, mothers holding babies, teenagers with small flags painted on their cheeks. The band started playing America the Beautiful. I stood behind the stage, my speech folded in my pocket. I could feel the outline of the paper against my palm, trembling just slightly. Behind me, a voice said softly, "Sergeant Collins?" I turned. It was Henry Miller, my old commanding officer, now gray around the edges, still standing as if the world owed him a salute. "I didn't think you'd show this year," he said. "Neither did I replied. He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the stage. "They're proud of you, you know. You could have stayed home, and no one would have blamed you." "Yeah," I said, eyes fixed on the crowd. "But maybe it's time I stop hiding behind that." Henry frowned slightly. "You mean the PTSD?" I shook my head slowly. "No, something else." When they called my name, I walked onto the stage. The applause felt like a wave crashing over me. Loud, heavy, impossible to stand against. I nodded, smiled, adjusted the microphone. Then I looked at the faces in front of me. Rows and rows of people who saw bravery where I saw a wound. And for the first time in 12 years, I decided not to lie to them. "My name is Sarah Collins," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I served 12 years in the United States Army, including 2 tours overseas. Every year, I stand here and thank everyone for remembering our service. But this year, I need to tell you a different kind of story." A ripple went through the crowd. Not the restless kind, the curious kind, the kind that happens right before something important. I glanced down at Emma in the front row. She was holding my handkerchief, just like she always did when I spoke. Her eyes were soft, trusting, and I thought, if I tell this story, she'll finally know who her mother really is. So I took a breath and began. "The last time I wore this uniform," I said quietly, "I wasn't thinking about medals or honor or even survival. I was thinking about a single promise I made, one that I broke." I could feel the crowd stilling, leaning in. "It was March 14th, I continued, in a small village just outside Kandahar. I was in charge of a convoy, 3 trucks, 6 soldiers, and 1 civilian translator. His name was Amir. He had a little girl, about Emma's age." The memory came flooding back. The heat, the sand, the sound of my heart pounding beneath armor. "I promised Amir that we'd get him home safely," I said, "that if he helped us with the mission, we'd make sure his family was protected." My throat tightened. The square was silent. Even the wind had stopped moving. But I broke that promise, I whispered, because that night we were ambushed, and when the smoke cleared, Amir was gone. I told my team to fall back. Protocol. And we did. We made it out, but he didn't. There it was, the truth. Small, sharp, unforgiving. I looked down at my hands, and for a moment, I wasn't standing on a stage. I was back in that convoy, the smell of burning rubber, the static of radio chatter, the distant sound of someone crying. I filed the report, I said. I wrote that we did everything we could, but that wasn't the truth. The truth is, I could have gone back for him. I could have tried harder, but I didn't. I was scared, and that fear has lived inside me ever since. In the crowd, someone shifted. Someone else coughed softly, but mostly, there was silence, the kind that hums like electricity when people are feeling something they don't yet understand. I came home a hero, I said slowly, but I didn't feel like one. And every Veterans Day, when people said, "Thank you," I wanted to tell them not to, because I didn't save everyone I was supposed to. I took a shaky breath, my eyes stinging. I'm not telling you this because I want forgiveness. I'm telling you because we build these statues and parades and words like bravery around people who are still learning how to forgive themselves. We call them heroes, but most of them are just trying to make peace with ghosts. The microphone crackled softly as my voice trembled on the last word. I paused, not for effect, but because I couldn't speak. The crowd stayed silent. And in that silence, for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel alone. When the speech ended, people didn't clap right away. They just stood there, some with tears in their eyes, some with hands over their hearts, some looking like they'd just heard their own story told through mine. Then slowly, softly, someone started to clap, then another and another, until the whole square was filled with applause. Not the kind that celebrates you, the kind that holds you. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to drift away, Emma ran up to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said softly, resting my hand on her hair. "I didn't want you to. But you saved so many people, Mom. You can't save everyone." Her voice cracked on the last word. I smiled through tears. "I know, but sometimes it takes years to believe that." Later that night, after the parade lights dimmed and the streets were quiet, I sat on the porch alone. The wind smelled like rain and barbecue smoke, that familiar American mix of pride and melancholy. I took off my medals and set them on the table beside me. They caught the porch light, shining, unbothered, unscarred. Then I whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry, Amir." And for the first time in 12 years, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like it. The mornings in Arlington had a rhythm I could almost predict. Coffee on the counter, the hum of cars outside, the soft chatter of neighbors greeting each other through the thin walls of our old apartment building. I used to find comfort in routine, in the steady cadence of a normal life after 12 years of chaos. But that morning, the quiet felt off. I was sorting through letters on my kitchen table when a small envelope fell from the stack of old military correspondence. It was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting familiar, almost careless, from one of my old squad mates, Mason. I hadn't heard from him in years. He'd always been the one with a sharp tongue and a softer heart than he let anyone see. The note inside was brief. "Sarah, there's something you never knew about Amir. Call me. Now." I froze. The coffee cup in my hands trembled. My mind immediately transported me back to that convoy, that night, that explosion of dust and fire, that impossible weight of failure. Amir, the little boy's daughter, the promise I broke. I set the note aside and tried to breathe. Rationally, I knew I should call Mason, but part of me wanted to bury it, leave the past exactly where it belonged. But that note, it was a key rattling in the lock of a door I thought I had sealed forever. I walked slowly to the living room, letting my gaze drift over the apartment. The familiar smell of the plants watered yesterday, the faint aroma of the pizza Emma had made for lunch, the hum of the heater, all ordinary. But something about the way sunlight fractured through the blinds made the shadows seem sharper, more accusing. I could almost hear the echo of that desert wind, the way it carried grit into every corner of a life you thought you'd survived. I opened my journal. The leather cover was worn, edges fraying, the pages slightly yellowed. I had kept it during my last tour. Every convoy, every village, every fleeting victory and crushing failure inked in private, never meant for anyone's eyes but mine. And yet now, as I leafed through it, I realized something. My memory of that night had always been incomplete. The entries were meticulous. Times, GPS coordinates, supply counts, but there were gaps. Moments where I had scrawled, "Too much fire, can't remember," or "Amir," followed by lines crossed out. Lines I didn't remember writing. My fingers trembled over the paper as I read them again and again, trying to force the memory to align with the words. There was a notation I hadn't noticed before, a small scrawl in the margin of one page. He said he'd be back. Didn't trust the convoy. I blinked. The memory flickered. Amir, leaning close, whispering something in Pashto. I had nodded, assured him everything would be fine. But now I couldn't remember what he'd actually said. That simple scribble made my chest tighten, the way a fresh wound does when you brush against it accidentally. I spent the afternoon in a haze, reading and rereading entries, watching the light shift across the apartment floor. Every page I turned seemed to whisper fragments of something I had buried deeper than the desert sand, something I hadn't wanted to see. Later, I found myself walking through the neighborhood, aimless. The streets of Arlington were quiet for once. I passed the small park where Emma and I had fed the ducks last spring. A mother called her child's name. A dog barked. A newspaper rustled in the wind. Everything was ordinary. Everything felt impossibly normal. And yet my chest was tight with the knowledge that nothing about that night had been simple. That evening, I called Mason. His voice came over the line like a familiar storm, direct and unyielding. "Sarah, you got the note?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good. Then you'll want to see this." He didn't explain further. He wouldn't. Not yet. I hated that about him. Always so blunt, so maddeningly careful about what he revealed. But I understood. He knew the past I carried like a shadow. By the time I hung up, night had fallen. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I sank into the sofa, journal in hand, and let the memories come. I remembered the convoy. 3 trucks, 6 soldiers, and Amir, the translator who trusted me with the lives of his family. The desert wind whipping against the truck's canvas roof. The dust thick as smoke in my lungs. The chatter of radios like static electricity in my skull. The ambush came without warning. Explosions, shouts, confusion. I remember the way the sand swallowed sight, the heat from the engines and burning rubber, the way the air smelled like metal and fear. My team moved like trained ghosts, snap decisions, cover fire, retreat. But Amir ran toward the truck's edge, his little daughter's voice in my mind, calling for him, even as bullets tore past. And then nothing. I had made the call to retreat. Protocol. Safety. The words sounded hollow in my memory now. I remember feeling my chest pound with fear, my hands shaking on the wheel, my mind screaming at me to go back. But I didn't. The journal didn't forgive me. Every word I'd written screamed at me. Every scratched out line, every shorthand note of supplies and casualties, every emotion I tried to compress into neat columns, they were all fragments of a truth I had refused to confront. And Mason's note had reminded me of something I'd tried to forget, that in the fog of that night, there had been more than just ambush. There had been whispers, orders that didn't make sense, a movement in the shadows that I hadn't fully registered at the time, something buried beneath the chaos. I spent the next day retracing the mission in my mind. Every decision I'd made, every order given, every glance at the convoy's rear, every hesitating moment when I could have turned back. And with each memory, a question began to form, quiet at first, then louder. Did I really understand what happened that night? I called another squad mate, Ramirez, who had been on the convoy. His voice was tired, measured. "Sarah," he said, "I wasn't going to bring it up, but Mason's right. There's something you don't remember. Something about Amir." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. Ramirez hesitated. "Check the logs, not the reports. The real logs, the ones we kept ourselves. You'll see." I hung up, heart hammering. The apartment suddenly felt small, constricting. The shadows seemed darker, the air heavier. I pulled the laptop closer, fingers shaking, and opened the encrypted files we had saved after the deployment. Hours passed. I traced every movement, every timestamp, every radio transmission. And then there it was, something I had missed, something that contradicted everything I thought I knew about that night. A file marked Amir, last location, showed movement not toward the ambush site, but away from it. A timestamp indicated a window of 5 minutes where Amir had been out of radio contact, a gap that no one had explained at the time. My heart raced. I could feel the old fear, the same tightness in my chest that had gripped me 12 years ago. And beneath that file, another note, not official, not meant for anyone but Mason and Ramirez, a scribbled line. Orders changed. Sarah doesn't know. Told to prioritize convoy over translator. My hands shook. I stared at the screen. The words were simple, bureaucratic, almost clinical, but the weight behind them was enormous. They meant that my failure, the guilt I had carried for 12 years, was not entirely my own. The apartment seemed to vanish around me. The hum of the city outside, the distant car alarms, the faint clatter of Emma's room down the hall, all muted. There was only the screen, the words, and the truth forming like smoke curling from a fire I had thought extinguished. I sank into the sofa, clutching the journal to my chest. Memories, guilt, loyalty, and betrayal, they all collided in a storm of emotions I had long tried to keep ordered. And now the storm had returned with a vengeance. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I reread the files and the journal, cross-referencing every detail I could remember, every instinct, every memory, every whispered warning I had ignored. It all pointed to one conclusion. What I had been carrying as guilt and shame might have been manipulated. A plan had been hidden from me, and Amir, the man whose family I had promised to protect, the man whose life I had thought I failed, the truth about him, about that night, was waiting for me. And somehow I knew I wasn't ready yet, not fully, but the pieces were aligning. The mystery was no longer a shadow in the back of my mind. It was real, tangible, and it was calling me to confront it. I closed the laptop, pressed my forehead to the worn cushions of the sofa, and whispered into the dark apartment, "I'm coming for the truth, Amir. I have to know. I have to understand." Outside, the wind rattled the blinds. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life went on. But inside, for the first time in 12 years, I felt the ghost of that night stir. Not as accusation, not as despair, but as a guide towards something I could no longer ignore. The next morning, the Arlington sun streamed weakly through my blinds, but I didn't notice. I was already on the phone with Ramirez. "You're sure the logs are intact?" I asked. "Yes," he said, voice tight. "Every transmission, every movement. It's all there. But be careful, Sarah. Some of what you'll see, it's not just paperwork." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I could feel the weight of what was coming, pressing down like armor I hadn't worn since I left Afghanistan. I spent the morning reviewing the convoy's path again, tracing every mile, every stop, every timestamp. And then a name I hadn't expected appeared in the logs. Lieutenant Daniels. I hadn't worked directly under him, but his orders had overridden ours in that final hour. I remembered him, a man whose polished exterior hid impatience and ambition. He had been insistent, almost cold, that the convoy prioritize its cargo over anything else. At the time, I had trusted that the decision was military protocol. Now, I wasn't so sure. I called Mason again. "Mason? Daniels? What was his role in Amir's death?" There was a pause, long enough for me to feel the echo of my own heartbeat. "He issued the order," Mason said finally. "That convoy moves. No exceptions, even if someone's left behind." The words landed like a punch. I closed my eyes, recalling the night, Amir running, calling, the dust and chaos, and me frozen by the rules I had sworn to follow. "You mean he knew what would happen?" I whispered. "Maybe," Mason replied. "Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe he thought it was necessary. I don't know. But he definitely changed the orders, and we all followed them." I dropped into the worn armchair by the window, journal open on my lap. I had written so many lines about fear and survival, but nothing about betrayal. Not explicitly. I had buried it under my own guilt, assumed I was the one to blame. Now I realized I hadn't been acting alone. The apartment felt smaller, walls closing in with memories and unspoken truths. I traced my fingers over the pages, stopping at the entry labeled Ambush 0300 hours. I could see my own handwriting, messy, shaky. I had noted every decision, every hesitation, but beneath my words, hidden in the scribbles, was the reality I hadn't admitted to anyone. Daniels had ordered the retreat before we even reached Amir's position. I felt sick. Betrayal, that word I had avoided for 12 years, now consumed me. I had been carrying it, thinking it was shame and failure when it had been deception all along. By afternoon, I arranged a video call with Ramirez and Mason together. They both appeared tense, the air between them heavy. "Sarah," Ramirez said, voice low, "you're not ready for everything. There's more than just orders. Amir, he wasn't just abandoned. He was used. And it's complicated." I leaned forward. "Used? How?" Mason exhaled sharply. "He had information, intelligence, details about a network. We were supposed to protect him, yes, But Daniels, he needed the network, not Amir. The ambush, it was partially set up. Amir's location was compromised before we even got there. I felt my stomach drop. Compromised? Yes, Ramirez said. Someone tipped them off. And Daniels knew. That's why the orders were strict. Don't go back. Don't deviate. We all followed them, but his voice faltered. We didn't know the full plan. Only now we're piecing it together. I gripped the edge of the chair. My chest ached. My hands shook. The guilt, the years of self-recrimination. It was still mine, yes, but it now had edges I hadn't seen. I wasn't just a mother, a soldier, a failed protector. I had been an unwitting player in a calculated betrayal. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. Why didn't you? Mason's eyes were heavy. We thought you knew. You always knew. And we wanted to protect you from it. But the truth has a way of clawing back, doesn't it? I stared at the screen. The room felt impossibly quiet. Even the hum of the city outside seemed distant, as though the universe had paused to let me absorb it. I closed my eyes, and the memory returned with brutal clarity. The convoy, the ambush, the orders. Amir running, looking at me with fear and trust. The moment I should have acted differently, but didn't. The orders that froze me. The betrayal that I had never suspected. The chaos of gunfire and dust. I thought of his daughter, her little face, smiling, unaware of the danger her father was in. And I realized what I had carried as guilt for years wasn't just mine. It was layered, complex, entwined with lies and omissions that no one had told me. Mason and Ramirez stayed silent for a moment, letting me absorb it. Finally, Mason said, Sarah, you need to know something else. I swallowed hard. What? He hesitated, then let out a breath. After the convoy fell back, Daniels, he ordered a cleanup team to verify casualties. He didn't tell us everything he found. Amir, he survived the initial ambush, but Daniels decided to cover it up. Officially, Amir was listed as dead, but he wasn't. I blinked, unable to process. He survived? Mason nodded for a short while, but they moved him. He was used as leverage. We only found fragments later, but no one ever told you. Not publicly, not officially. It was all buried in reports marked confidential. I felt my chest tighten so hard it hurt to breathe. All this time, I've been haunted, thinking I failed. Him, thinking he died because I didn't try hard enough. And it wasn't true. It's true you didn't go back, Ramirez said softly. But it wasn't because you didn't care. It was because you didn't know. We didn't know. And Daniels, he wanted it that way. I sank into the chair, the journals spilling into my lap. The words I had written, my confessions, my self-flagellation, my guilt, all still true. But now they were tinged with something else. Betrayal. A deliberate choice by someone I had trusted. Someone with power. Someone who made a decision that cost a man his life. The weight of 12 years crushed down on me. But beneath it, a spark of clarity flickered. The anger, the sorrow, the guilt. They weren't misplaced. They were misplaced in context, yes, but they were valid. I had loved, cared, and failed as best I could with the information I had. The room was silent for a long time. I stared at the journal, at the screen, at the faces of the men who had once been my family in war. And then I whispered, almost to myself, so it wasn't just me. It wasn't only my fault. Mason's expression softened. No, Sarah, not yours alone. But you still carry the weight because you care. And that makes you human. I exhaled slowly, the wind from the open window brushing against my cheek. Outside, Arlington continued, oblivious to the storm I had uncovered in the small apartment. The hum of traffic, the distant barking of a dog, the occasional shout from a neighbor. It was normal, ordinary. But inside, the world I thought I knew had shifted. I opened the journal again, tracing the lines of my own handwriting. The ink seemed to pulse with meaning now. Not just memory. Each note, each crossed out line, each scrawled emotion, they were part of the story I had lived and part of the story I had yet to fully understand. Tomorrow, I whispered, I'm going to find out everything. I knew what I had to do. I needed the final pieces, the truth of Amir's fate and the hidden layers of that night, all the things Daniels had buried and all the lies that had haunted me. For 12 years, I had carried ghosts. Now, I was ready to meet them face to face. I didn't sleep that night. The phone calls, the journal, the files, and Mason's revelation replayed in my mind like a relentless loop. By morning, my decision had crystallized. I needed to confront Daniels, get the full truth about Amir, and finally see the pieces of that night laid bare. I drove to the old base office where Daniels had been stationed after our deployment. The streets of Arlington were quiet. the sunlight weak and hesitant, as though even the world outside knew this day would be heavy. I parked and took a deep breath, feeling the wind carry a mix of exhaust fumes, coffee, and fallen leaves into the car. My chest tightened with anticipation. This wasn't just confrontation. It was unearthing a 12-year-old wound. Inside the office, Daniels sat behind a polished wooden desk, his posture perfect, as if the years hadn't weighed on him at all. His sharp eyes studied me without warmth. "Sergeant Collins," he said, voice clipped, professional. "It's been a long time." "Lieutenant Daniels," I replied evenly, hiding the tremor in my hands. "I need to talk about Amir. That night, everything you didn't tell me." His face flickered, brief, subtle, and then back to stone. "That was years ago, Sarah. Why dig it up now?" "Because I need to know the truth," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Not the reports, not the public version, the truth. You made decisions that affected lives. I was there. I followed orders, but I need to understand what really happened to him." Daniels leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You think you're the only one haunted by that night?" "I don't care about what you think," I shot back. "I care about Amir, his family, and the fact that I've spent 12 years blaming myself for things that weren't entirely in my control. I deserve answers. He deserves answers." He exhaled slowly, and for the first time, the facade cracked. "Fine, but be prepared. The truth isn't neat. It isn't heroic. It's messy, and it might destroy the image you've built of yourself." I nodded. I was ready for it, or at least, I thought I was. If you're listening to this story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps keep these voices alive. Now, let's talk about where we end. Daniels leaned forward, voice low. "Amir survived the initial ambush, yes, but he was captured by local forces. They knew he had information about contacts, locations, intel. We were instructed to prioritize the convoy over him. You didn't disobey orders. You followed them. But you didn't know, none of us did, that he would be held for leverage. The cleanup team found traces of him days later, but by then, he had been moved out of our reach. His fate? Uncertain. Some reports claim he was executed. Others that he was sold to another faction. I never confirmed it. I didn't want to. My hands gripped the edge of the desk. "You didn't want to, what, save him? Or tell me?" "Both," Daniels admitted. "Every decision I made was to protect the mission, the unit, the network. Amir was collateral. And yes, I protected you from knowing the full horror, because I knew it would haunt you. You were the heart of that convoy, Sarah. I thought sparing you would be mercy." Mercy, a word so cold it nearly cut through the residual heat of betrayal I had carried. I could feel anger rising, coiling like a living thing inside me. But beneath it, something else, understanding. Calculated decisions in war are rarely kind. Brutality is a measure of logic, not morality. But still, the weight of 12 years of silence was unbearable. I stood, pacing the office like a storm contained in 4 walls. "Do you realize what this does to someone? What it's done to me?" I blamed myself. Every Veterans Day, every quiet night, every lull in Emma's laughter. It was my fault. I thought I failed him. I thought I was weak. And all along, you decided what I should or shouldn't know? Daniels didn't flinch. "I thought I was protecting you from the truth." "I don't need protection," I snapped, my voice trembling. "I needed honesty. I needed the chance to make things right, even if it's too late." He studied me, expression unreadable, and finally said, "Then go. Find the fragments. Piece them together, if you can." I left the office, lungs tight, heart hammering. The sun had shifted, shadows long across the parking lot. Every step I took toward my car was measured, heavy with the knowledge that the hunt for the rest of Amir's story had begun. I spent the next few days tracking down squad mates, contacts, anyone who had been near the convoy. Each conversation added shards to the mosaic of that night. Whispers of mistrust, inconsistencies in reports, notes about orders being altered without the team's knowledge. A former intelligence officer mentioned something in passing, a small dossier labeled confidential, Amir, that had never been released. A bureaucratic dead end meant the files were sealed, but someone in Arlington knew a former contact who had copies. By evening, I was sitting across from Ramirez in a dimly lit cafe, the aroma of burnt coffee and pastries filling the space. His eyes were tired, lined with years of shared trauma. "I've got it," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. I opened it carefully. Inside were intercepted communications, intelligence reports, even photographs, some blurred, some unmistakably Amir, alive after the ambush. My chest constricted. Every image, every line of text tore through the old grief I had carried, cutting and healing simultaneously. He pointed to a line in a report. "Look, after the ambush, Amir was held by the local faction for 3 days before being moved. Daniel's orders prioritized convoy safety, yes, but also kept us blind to avoid emotional interference. He didn't tell you because he feared you'd act against orders. He underestimated how far you'd go once you knew. I leaned back, absorbing the revelation, shock, anger, grief, and a strange flicker, relief. Amir hadn't been abandoned in the way I imagined, but he had been betrayed, used as leverage, moved like a pawn. I closed the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility shift. Not off my shoulders. No, I still carried guilt, but clarified, redefined, and beneath the guilt, a spark of resolve ignited. I have to find out what happened after those 3 days, I said quietly, almost to myself. I need to know if he survived. I need to know if justice can be done, even if it's years too late. Ramirez nodded. And you will, but be careful. People don't want the truth out. Some things, Sarah, some things are still dangerous. Even now, I felt the pulse of adrenaline, the same that had guided me through war zones, through ambushes, through fear. Only now, it was directed inward, toward uncovering the last truths of a life I had touched and failed. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, journal open, files spread across the table, phone on speaker with Mason listening silently on the other end. I traced every timestamp, every movement, every decision, and then, finally, the fragmented pattern came together. The ambush wasn't just a random attack. Amir's capture was no accident. Daniel's orders, the missing intel, the altered logs, they were all pieces of a deliberate cover-up. Someone in command had made a choice, and that choice had cost a man his life. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar mix of guilt and fury rise. But now it was tempered by clarity. I knew what I had to do next: confront the full truth, demand answers, and finally give Amir and myself the justice that had been denied for over a decade. By the time I lay down that night, exhaustion pressed against me like armor, but underneath, a spark of determination burned. I wasn't just a soldier who followed orders anymore. I was Sarah Collins, survivor, mother, and seeker of truth. And I wouldn't stop until I knew exactly what had happened to Amir and why. Outside, the Arlington wind rustled the trees. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a child laughed. Life carried on, oblivious to the storm I had stirred awake. But inside, I was alive in a way I hadn't been since that night in Kandahar. Alert, focused, and ready to confront the shadows I had carried for 12 years. The morning after I pieced together the evidence, the Arlington sky was heavy with gray clouds, as though it knew what the day would bring. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers brushing over the photographs of Amir, the printed logs, the intercepted messages. Emma was at school. Henry had left for a small Veterans Day remembrance at the community center, and the apartment was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft whistle of wind through the window. I picked up my phone and called Ramirez first. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when he answered. "Yes," I said, the words steady, though my stomach churned. "People need to know. I need to tell someone. Amir deserves that. His family deserves that." "You're aware of the consequences?" he pressed. "I am," I said, "and I'm ready." By mid-morning, Mason arrived with a folder full of documents, copies of reports, and detailed timelines. "We have to be meticulous," he said. "If this goes public, there's no going back. But we can't keep hiding. Not anymore." I nodded. The weight of the past 12 years, the burden of silence, pressed down on me. But beneath it, a strange sense of relief coursed through my chest. For the first time, I wasn't alone. The truth was no longer buried under my uniform or my journal. It was here, tangible, ready to be spoken. We decided to start small. A letter to the local newspaper, a recounting of the events, carefully edited to honor Amir's memory and explain the betrayals that had kept the truth hidden. By late afternoon, the editor called back. "Sarah, this is heavy, powerful. It will hit hard. Are you prepared for the attention?" "I am," I said. "I've carried it for 12 years. It's time." As soon as the article went live, responses began flooding in. Emails, calls, messages on social media. People were shocked, horrified, empathetic. Many veterans reached out, sharing their own ghosts, their own regrets. Some expressed anger toward Daniels, toward the military bureaucracy, toward the systemic failures that had let Amir die. And others simply wrote to thank me for my courage in finally speaking. I couldn't read it all at once. I paced the apartment, glancing at the photographs of Amir and his daughter, the journal, the folder Mason had left. Henry called later that evening. "Sarah, I read the article," he said, voice low. "I don't know what to say. People are shaken. You're shaking them in a way that matters. And yet, I hear your voice through. You're not just telling a story, you're giving it life." I let out a shaky breath. I had to, Henry. I couldn't let it stay buried. I've spent 12 years punishing myself for what I thought I did wrong. And now I see there were layers to the truth I never knew. I needed people to understand, even if the truth is painful. He was silent for a moment. "You've made them see. And maybe now, you can start seeing yourself differently too." That night, Emma returned from her friend's house. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, sifting through the logs once more. She came over, slipping her hand into mine. "You're still alive," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "After everything, you did the right thing." "I'm not sure what right means anymore," I admitted, "but I did what I could. And now we'll see what the world thinks." The following days were a blur of calls, interviews, and private meetings. The military launched an internal review. Daniels was summoned for questioning, and the local news covered the story with a mixture of awe and outrage. People in Arlington approached me on the street, some with tears, others with solemn nods, and many with small tokens of appreciation. One woman pressed a folded flag into my hands, whispering, "For the truth you carried." Amid all this, a quiet moment emerged. I sat on the porch, evening air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and distant barbecue smoke. Emma joined me, bringing a cup of cocoa. We sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky bleeding shades of pink and orange. "Do you think he would have wanted all this?" she asked, her voice small. I held her hand, squeezing gently. "I hope so. I think he would have wanted the world to know, not just about what happened, but about the person he was. Brave, loyal, human." The next week, Daniels faced a formal inquiry. The transcripts, reports, and communications we had gathered formed the backbone of the investigation. His defenses were cold, procedural, but beneath the polish, the guilt was unmistakable. No one could ignore the trail of deception. Amir's family, once distant, unaware of the full story, received a personal letter from me, explaining everything we had uncovered. I didn't expect forgiveness. Not from them, not from myself, but I hoped they could understand. And I hoped that, finally, I could begin to untangle the guilt that had tightened around my chest like a vice. One afternoon, I returned to the base with Ramirez and Mason to give a formal statement to the review board. The room smelled of polished wood and old carpet, a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. I recounted everything: the ambush, Daniel's orders, the cover-up, the fragments of Amir's survival. Every word I spoke was deliberate, calm, reflective, yet filled with the weight of 12 years of suppressed grief and anger. As I finished, there was a silence that seemed to stretch, holding everyone in place. And then one of the officers spoke, voice shaking slightly. "Sergeant Collins, your honesty, your courage, it's remarkable. You've faced something most of us cannot even imagine. Thank you for bringing the truth to light." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The truth had been unveiled. The public had seen it, and while the wounds remained, the shadows of secrecy were finally lifting. Back at home that evening, Emma and I walked the quiet streets of Arlington. The neighborhood was calm, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of trees. We paused at the small memorial for local veterans, the names etched in stone glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Mom," Emma said, "do you think he knew you cared?" "I hope so," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hope he knew. I think he always knew." The days that followed brought a slow, steady wave of closure. Daniels faced the consequences of his decisions. The military implemented a formal review of protocols for future missions. And Amir's story, though tragic, was no longer buried. People reached out, families connected, and I began to hear whispers of Amir's daughter, living somewhere safely, finally knowing the truth of her father. And through it all, I discovered something profound, that speaking the truth, even when it is painful, even when it shakes your world, can begin to free the heart from years of self-inflicted torment. I returned to my kitchen one morning, journal open, hands tracing the familiar lines of memory. I paused at a page I had written the night before the revelation of Daniel's betrayal. "I am haunted. I am tired, but I will not be silent." I smiled softly, a full, unbroken smile this time. The ghosts remained, yes. Some nights they visited, whispering the old regrets. reminding me of failures and losses. But they no longer ruled me. They were fragments of a past I had faced, a past I had uncovered, and a past I had made peace with, at least enough to start walking forward. I poured myself a cup of coffee, inhaling its warmth and aroma, feeling the sunlight spill across the counter, and thought quietly, for Amir, for his daughter, for me. And in that moment, for the first time in 12 years, I felt not just relief, but the quiet, powerful sense of justice restored. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. The world had seen me as a hero, and now they had seen the truth. The Arlington mornings had taken on a new quality. The sunlight no longer felt accusatory or heavy. It was warmer, gentler, a quiet reminder that time continued even after the storms of the past 12 years. I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching leaves twirl down from the maple trees, each one catching the early light like a fragment of something I had lost and found again. Emma came bounding down the steps, her backpack bouncing with each movement. "Mom, guess what?" she said, her voice bright but tentative. "I got a message today from Amir's daughter. She found me. She wants to meet. She wants to know about you." My chest tightened, but not with the familiar weight of guilt. It was something different. Anticipation, hope, and a quiet, trembling joy. "Really?" I whispered. Emma nodded, her face glowing. "She said she's been waiting a long time to hear the truth." I didn't know what to say. The years of imagining Amir's fate, of carrying his absence like a stone in my chest, had prepared me for grief, for regret, for anger. But this possibility of connection, of closure, was a gift I hadn't dared to hope for. Later that week, we met in a small cafe on the outskirts of Arlington. Amir's daughter, Layla, was older than Emma, her eyes carrying a quiet intensity that mirrored his. When she walked toward us, I felt my throat tighten and my hands tremble. "Sarah," she said softly, "I've heard stories, fragments. My father spoke of you sometimes, in the few letters he sent before." Her voice faltered. "Before he disappeared?" I reached out, hesitating, and then gently held her hands. "Layla, I never stopped thinking about him, about you. I carried the guilt for 12 years. Not knowing if I could ever make it right. I wanted to tell you everything, and now I can." We sat together, and I recounted the ambush, the orders, the cover-up, the hidden truths that had haunted me since that night in Kandahar. I told her about Daniel's deception, about the moments I doubted my courage, about the sleepless nights filled with her father's absence. She listened quietly, nodding, her grip on my hands never loosening. When I finished, she exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to release the tension of years. "He loved you," she said simply. "He always believed in you. I've read your articles, your letters, your speeches. You never let him be forgotten, not even for a moment." Her words struck me, a balm to the wounds I had carried silently. I realized that the weight I bore wasn't entirely mine. That part of it had been shared with the people who survived, with those who remembered, and with the family I had yet to meet. In the days that followed, I visited the Veterans Support Group more regularly. I shared my story, not just for the record or the public, but as a living testament to the complex nature of bravery, guilt, and human error. Some cried, some nodded, some simply sat in silence, absorbing the weight of truth and courage. One afternoon, Henry came by. He brought an old photograph from our Afghanistan deployment, a snapshot of the convoy, of Amir smiling beside us, unaware of the danger he would face. He handed it to me with a gentle smile. "You kept your honor intact, Sarah," he said. "Even when the world made it impossible to see, you chose truth over comfort. That's real bravery." I studied the photograph, tracing Amir's face with my finger, remembering the boy he was, the father he had been, the man he never got to fully become. "It's strange," I said softly. "I've spent so long punishing myself, but I see now. Survival isn't about being perfect. It's about holding on to what's human." Emma came in behind him, carrying Layla's notebook. "Mom, she's drawing something for you," she said. "She wants you to see it before she mails it." I took the notebook and opened it carefully. Inside were sketches of landscapes I had never seen, of a young girl holding her father's hand, and of a woman in uniform, recognizable only to me, standing bravely, smiling gently, as if telling the world that she had carried the weight and survived. Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, "for remembering him, for forgiving, and for trusting me." And in that moment, I understood something I had not fully grasped before. Healing is not linear, and closure is not a single event. It is a series of breaths, of small gestures, of moments where love, truth, and courage intersect. Weeks later, Veterans Day came again. The parade was smaller this year, the town quieter, but the meaning carried more weight. I stood behind the stage once more, Emma by my side, Layla holding my hand gently. The crowd recognized me, of course, but this year, they also understood, partially at least, the journey I had endured to be there. I spoke again, slowly, deliberately. Today isn't about medals, I said, voice steady, yet warm. It isn't about appearances or ceremonies. It's about truth, about honoring those who were lost, those who survived, and those who continue to carry invisible burdens. It's about the courage it takes to face the past and the strength it takes to make peace with it. The crowd listened, some nodding, some with tears glistening in their eyes. But this time, the silence that followed was different. It was not heavy. It was filled with understanding, with empathy, with shared humanity. After the ceremony, as the town slowly emptied, I walked through the streets with Emma and Layla. Leaves crunched beneath our feet, and the November air smelled of wood smoke and faint rain. Layla slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you, Sarah," she said softly, "for everything." I smiled, a full, unguarded smile, feeling the first true sense of closure I had known in 12 years. "Thank you," I replied, "for letting me share it, and for letting me finally heal." That night, at home, I opened my journal one last time. I wrote a single line: "We carry the past, but we do not have to be defined by it." I set the pen down, tracing the edge of the page with my fingers, and felt the weight in my chest finally begin to lift. The ghosts remained, yes, but they no longer controlled me. And in their place, something warmer, quieter, and infinitely human had settled. Forgiveness, clarity, and hope. I poured myself a cup of coffee, inhaled its comforting aroma, and sat on the porch, watching the Arlington skyline glimmer in the evening light. Emma was inside, laughing softly with Layla. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere, life went on, and I knew. So would I. For Amir, for his daughter, for the truth, and for me. I sit here now, on the porch, watching the last of the November light fade over Arlington. The air carries that familiar scent, a mix of wood smoke, damp leaves, and something faintly sweet from the bakery down the street. It's ordinary, it's quiet, and yet, it's the kind of ordinary that feels miraculous after everything I've carried. Sometimes, I think about the moments we don't speak of, the silences, the small regrets, the chances we didn't take. For 12 years, I lived in those silences. I carried the weight of decisions I thought I had made alone, convinced that acknowledging them would only bring shame. But truth has a way of finding its voice. When I finally spoke of Amir, of the ambush, of Daniel's betrayal, I didn't just speak for myself. I spoke for the ones who couldn't, for the ones whose stories were buried beneath bureaucracy, fear, or misunderstanding. I spoke for the moments that deserved to be remembered, the lives that deserved acknowledgement, and the people who deserved justice, even if imperfect. And in speaking, I discovered something I hadn't expected, that healing begins not when the world forgives us, but when we allow ourselves to be seen as we truly are: vulnerable, flawed, brave, human. I think of Emma and Layla, two young lives shaped by events they did not choose, and I am reminded of the responsibility we carry to tell the truth, to honor the past, and to leave a space where the next generation can live without carrying the same invisible burdens. I look back at my medals, still on the table, catching the light. They gleam, yes, but they are not the measure of who I am. The measure lies in the choices I made afterward, the courage to confront the past, to demand the truth, to connect with those I once thought I had failed. And I wonder, quietly, how many of us are living with our own ghosts? How many of us are carrying truths that feel too heavy, too dangerous, too shameful to share? I don't have the answers for everyone, but I do know this: if you have the chance to speak, to act, to confront a shadow you've carried too long, take it. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for the quiet, steady liberation that comes when you stop hiding from yourself. Because in that act, small, simple, courageous, you find peace. Not perfect peace, not an erasure of mistakes, but a peace that allows the heart to breathe, the soul to rest, and the future to unfold with clarity and grace. So, I ask you gently, from the porch of my life now. What truths are you holding on to? And what would it feel like, just for a moment, to let them surface, to speak them, to honor them, to allow yourself to be human in all the ways you've hidden from the world? If I can do it, if I can face 12 years of guilt, betrayal, and silence, then you can face yours. And perhaps, in the process, you'll discover something unexpected, that the heart can carry sorrow, but it can also carry hope, that the mind can remember mistakes, but it can also remember courage, that the soul, after all, is not defined by what we hide, but by the grace with which we finally reveal it. I hope, in sharing my story, you feel seen. I hope you feel understood, and I hope you feel the quiet strength that comes when the truth is finally allowed to breathe. Would you have done what I did? Would you have spoken, even when it scared you? Let's hold each other's courage together, because that is how we begin to heal. Sometimes life takes from us, but sometimes it teaches us too. If this story touched you today, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, please don't keep it inside. Tell me your story. Thank you in advance for sharing this moment with me. I wonder which part of this story stayed with you. Which moment did you feel deep in your chest? And where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. I personally read every single comment myself, because your words might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if you haven't yet, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because here at True Heart Voices, every story deserves to be heard, and every heart deserves to heal. Did you like my story? If you listened all the way to the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got many more life stories just like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one. With love.